Back in 2021, Alex Traska from MyHouseYourHouse Radio got in touch with us at Soundcheck. He and his associate Jackie were organising an event called the Mentally Sound Weekender, and he invited us to be one of their nominated charities. We'll always be so grateful to him and the My House Your House community for supporting us, encouraging us, and making us part of their collective history. To that end, it was so great to speak with Alex for this episode of Soundcheck Stories and draw upon his extensive experience in music alongside a deep and honest dialogue on grief, shared loss, and the power of community. Please be aware that this interview involves discussion around suicide and bereavement that may be triggering or upsetting. Alex Traska, so good to have you on the Soundcheck Stories podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really good to see you. I'm really looking forward to hearing your journey and to unpack some of what you have experienced as a DJ, as a promoter, as a radio boss. You've been on the scene since 2001. I think it's probably fair to say that you're something of a champion and a hero of the underground Midlands music scene. They're local primarily around Nottingham, but with a history of parties and events across the country. You're also the creator, alongside Eric Anderson, of My House Your House, which is a live streamed radio station that ran, albeit with a slight hiatus in the middle, for 19 years, and birthed an incredible community of music lovers, selectors, and connoisseurs of house, jazz, hip hop, and everything in between. It's been a real journey, and I really love just to hear your take on things over the years. And so let's start by talking about your early career, because you started off working at the Bomb in Nottingham, the legendary Nottingham is. And so, how was that as an experience? So, what did you learn from working in that environment?
I mean, I started going to the Bomb when I was 16 years old because it was, I mean, a legendary venue. It's still talked about regularly. People have so many hazy memories of it to share all the time.
Right.
I gravitated to it because I already was into house music, the type of house music that you couldn't buy on compilation CDs and HMV very well. It was a club that had Sasha and Craig Richards and Lee Burridge doing a legendary Tyrant Night. Right. People from Detroit, Kevin Saunderson, Chicago house DJs, Derek Carter, and so on. So I was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. I used to go there alone when I was in college because lots of my friends weren't into that music. But the Bomb was a real community. It was a tribe. It was the kind of place you'd be alone for 15 minutes. So as soon as legally possible, I begged them for a job. And it meant that I got to kind of meet the people behind the scenes running it, and not least the mighty James Bailey, legendary promoter of Venus nightclub in Nottingham, which launched in the very early 90s and was the first home of DIY, who later followed him to the Bomb. And he was extremely well connected, and it meant that after work, once I'd cleaned up the bar, I was hanging out after the doors had closed with my heroes and idols,
Right.
Lots of the DJs I've just mentioned, and funny stories about hanging out with people like Paul from Circulation, for example, which I'd probably better not repeat on this show. But yeah, it meant that as a young, impressionable kid, really hungry for knowledge about music to play, I just got to talk to these guys about it and pick up tips. And hang out with people that were just entirely passionate about house music, but also drum and bass and jazz and soul, and the DJs playing disco upstairs as the sun rose through the glass roof of Barrios in the summertime. So yeah, a really important and informative and formative part of my life, definitely.
Absolutely. And at that point, you were an employee and a punter and part of that community, but you weren't actually DJing at that point. You were a music lover and a collector, but were you actually DJing at that point, or was that something which came
Yeah,
later?
I mean, I bought when I was 17, so around a similar time. My parents said to me, I'm very, very lucky to be offered such a gift. They said you can either have driving lessons or turntables. The fact I still don't have a driving license will probably tell you which way I went on that.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
So yeah, I was buying records, and but I was young and inexperienced, desperate for gigs, and
Okay.
yeah, I had my first open decks slot on a Wednesday night in a club that doesn't exist anymore in Nottingham called the Edge.
Okay.
Previous to that, called the Staircase. And I remember being so nervous that I couldn't even lift the tone arm onto the record without it shaking up and down. So
Okay.
yeah.
Man. Interesting. And you said, like, you were subject to a really eclectic mix of underground music and house and hip hop and all that, and that kind of like drum and bass and a kind of very broad education. So as a DJ, like, when did you start to develop your own voice and your own sound for your craft?
I think I mean, I grew up listening to a really broad range of music thanks to my father, who,
Mm,
in the car would have everything on from Led Zeppelin, Steely Dan, Joni Mitchell, to Technotronic and Stevie V,
cool.
and 808 State, Brian Eno, and things like that, and everything in between. So as a youngster, I then, young DJ, I was really into new school breaks and
Okay.
dance music and drum and bass and quite in your face stuff that was
Mm,
fresh and exciting. But I think that really the point at which that changed into being something more reflective of the kind of things I like now was, post going to, say, the Bomb,
mm,
hanging out with friends that I'd met there in the music scene in Nottingham, and then hanging out back at their houses. We'd been dancing to tech house, but
sure.
back in their lounge, they were putting on um, yacht rock, as we dub it
Wow.
now.
Okay. Yeah.
Lots of New York disco, a lot of New
Interesting.
York disco. And that's what we would go and chill out to. And that really opened my mind. There's something, I was already receptive to that kind of music, but then, to then start enjoying that in that context was new. And it really broadened my appeal. And I was hanging out with Peach and Fran, who went by the moniker the Midnight Candymen for a little while.
Okay.
Um, and they were involved in writing and running the Keep On magazine, which existed for a short time, but was really well respected in the national dance and even international dance music community. And then people like Red Rackham,
Mm,
Danny Berman, who was a really good friend at that time, who was always scathing of our love of house music. Now he's a massive house producer, but but at the time, he was playing records that none of my other friends were playing,
right.
and forced me. I don't mean like under duress, but like,
Mm,
his selections made me listen to things that I otherwise wouldn't have. So I've really got to hand it to those guys
wow.
for
Yeah.
giving
Yeah.
me a leg up in that respect.
Interesting. Did that feed into the creation of the My House Your House radio station in 2005? Because that was something which obviously which you birthed and which you pioneered alongside Eric.
Mm.
Was that a reaction to so much of the music which you've been subject to?
Um, to a degree, yeah. There was pivotal to the launch of My House Your House were two previous websites that existed with their communities. Not least something called undergroundhouse.net, which was
Okay.
run by a chap called Ben out of Manchester. And undergroundhouse.net in 2002, pretty much everybody you could imagine that was producing or DJing deep house music across the world was active on that forum. This is when
Wow.
forums were still like a really big deal because it was
Okay.
pre-social media.
Sure.
Um, and a lot of these producers and DJs, of course, were not just into house music, not least Mark Farina, who
Right.
did his and still does the awesome Mushroom Jazz
Mm,
series, and they were massively inspirational. So on that website, that's where Eric and Anderson and I met,
right.
and we started chatting on MSN, and just through a shared love of sharing, like, oh, check this tune out, check that tune out, whether it was house, whether it was a hip hop thing, we were like, we've got other people that want to share DJ sets, not of their own, but of other artists that they like. And so we set up an FTP
Yeah.
and gave people a login. And sooner or later, we thought we need a web front end for this. So what we're going to call it? Well, I'm sharing my house music sets, and you're sharing your house music sets. Let's call it My House Your House.
Right.
You know, I don't think we spent that much time trying to think the name up in retrospect. But yeah, then that quickly mushroomed into the idea of, well, hang on a minute. If we've got a server and we've got a website front end, we've got the technology to be able to connect these up and do some live streaming. And importantly, we had inherited a community of people straight out of undergroundhouse.net
Right.
that were looking for the kind of platform to go and do something else. And because we weren't in direct competition with undergroundhouse.net, because we weren't a chat forum, we were broadcasting music.
Right.
So that all really came together just at the right time. We picked up some very simple technology, which was Winamp's Shoutcast server technology, connected it all up, and went live. But we had our first live broadcast was a DJ in California via a website built by me in Nottingham in a server in Eric's parents' basement in a small town called Stavanger in Norway.
Wow.
And none of us had ever met. We had never sat around a table together. We hadn't even spoken on the phone. We'd only communicated via MSN. So that was kind of, that was quite pioneering in a way. And indeed, BBC and Channel 4 both did features on us because this use of internet technology to bring together people across countries and even continents was kind of groundbreaking at the time.
Pretty amazing, man. Such a great story. And from that genesis in 2005, how did things grow? Did it was there quite a quick organic growth with the station? Did you find that community which you did it kind of gather quite quickly around you?
No, not really.
Okay.
My House Your House was never conceived as a business. It was never conceived to kind of. I mean, it's now the music industry's changed so much that everything is brand driven. It's online marketing. Everybody has a logo, whether it's a club night or even a DJ, and it's all about your reach online and the
Sure.
popularity contest, really. And 20 years ago, the internet wasn't like that. The music industry wasn't so brand orientated. Sure, there was legendary bands, but you could make it without. And we always said, Eric and I, day one, and this rang true all the way through to the end, 19 years later, we said, we will never charge anybody to listen to it. We'll never charge anybody to DJ on it. It will always be free. The only negative of that is, of course, it meant that there was never any money. So we couldn't do any big promotions or massive, spectacular events. It was all kind of cobbled together. So as long as people understood that and were down with that vibe, the door was flung open to them.
Right.
It wasn't about getting big audiences. It was about taking part in the community, doing it for the love of the music, certainly not for a cut of any pie because there was no pie. And I think that kept it pure.
Right.
It did mean its growth was very slow, but I don't regret that for a second.
Because it did become an event and a party as well. Like you did put on a lot of events as My House Yours, didn't you? And that was not that was from what I read, across the country. It wasn't just Nottingham. You were in London as well. You did events sort of around the country. And so, did you kind of have to step into that that promoter role as well, alongside presumably being a DJ at your own events?
Well, thankfully not, because I can't stand promoting. I think
Okay.
it's the most difficult, thankless, stressful task, and
Sure.
a massive applause to anybody that steps up, especially in underground music of any form, to do it because it is driven really by passion. But the fact is that My House Your House was a collective, and it had these passionate, willing people all over the country that finally had a flag to fly that unified us all. If you were just out there on your own, you're some nobody DJ in, I don't know, Liverpool in 2005, how could you sort of display any kind of credibility straight
Sure.
away? Well, if you were part of My House Your House, you could wave that flag, which was this bigger
Yeah.
network that other people had heard of. So people did that. So
Mm.
without me doing anything, people went, we want to do a party in Liverpool, we want to do parties in London.
Oh, okay.
We had
Right.
residences in Hollywood, California, parties in San Diego, um, Arkansas, Dallas, Texas. I think we even had a party in South Africa, maybe even China. It's hazy. So I ran parties in Nottingham, but it was
Right.
individuals that just wanted to fly the flag that did them elsewhere. And that was really special. And it meant that I didn't have to do promoting, which I hated.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. Okay, so it kind of had its own remote expressions in different locations, globally as well as
Absolutely.
wow.
And I always said, I'll do the design and we'll help push it online, but I don't, any money that you make, if it's your event, you keep. You've got complete creative control. It was
Oh,
just
man,
do it under our banner, and people were happy to.
that's fascinating. Okay, I didn't realize that. I thought that you were hands-on in terms of all the in terms of putting on these shows and events and no, okay.
Can't take all that credit. No.
No, fair play, man. And I wanted to ask about because obviously My House Your House was a joint effort between you and your
Mm,
friend Eric Anderson, who tragically passed away in 2008. So
yeah.
can I ask you about the impact that that had on you and also on the station at that time?
Um, I mean, first of all, it was total shock. I mean, tragically, since Eric, I've had four friends close to me um, take their lives,
Okay,
and Eric was the first. And like lots of those other friends, there was no signals that anything was wrong. Eric
okay,
was a amazingly intelligent, amazingly popular, good-looking guy with a good job, a fantastic partner who shared a beautiful apartment in Norway. And you think on the face of it, all the boxes are ticked, but there was something enough behind Eric, some demons or things that we'll never even understand and can't. I could never, I'm never going to be able to understand that. That meant that he's not with us anymore. And yeah, I think it sent the community reeling, and certainly there was a huge outpouring of gratitude as well as grief,
yeah,
and it kind of hardened our resolve to continue more than ever, really, um, because we'd found each other with Eric's help, and it would be a fantastic dedication to his memory to keep going. Um, yeah, and there's been other people. I mean, very tragically, the person that introduced Eric Anderson and I in the first place um, was a chap called David Bowen, who was a photographer. Um, and he used to work on music festivals all over the world. He used to shoot for DJ Magazine. Lots of the cover shots were by David Bowen. I ended up living with him actually for a brief period. Tragically, a few years after Eric, David Bowen took his life as well. And it's just like, to see this repeated amongst your friends. We've lost other people in My House, Your House. Some people that have always been caught in My House, Your House for a long time were the Rug Cutter crew, who were from Lincoln, and Rug Cutter later sort of mutated into Ultrasound, who,
mm,
when we relaunched in the pandemic in 2020, Ultrasound hit the screens, pow, and was like their setup and the brightness of what they were doing and their energy as people. Jackie and Sean and Sean's daughter Poppy, as well as Nick and so many others. Jay Dimes, they've got a collective in Lincoln as well. But Sean was kind of the daddy of that, and Sean's loss as well was that hit us really hard, and that happened just as we were organising a mental health fundraiser, and that's exactly that fundraiser, which is how My House Your
okay.
House was introduced to Soundcheck and you.
Wow, man.
So it's kind of been a tragic part of our DNA.
Mm,
But I guess if you've got any large community, that you're going to have to face this kind of tragedy at
that's
some
good.
point.
I know that we obviously connected during that time. largely in response to some of the things which you would face, which you would experience as a community and personally. And do you feel like, as someone who's been impacted directly by um, by by by, by poor mental health, and the fallout of that, do you feel like there's enough being done, enough being spoken about, um, particularly among artists, DJs, creatives? Do you think there's enough being done in this area to combat poor mental health?
Tough question. I mean, it's. I think now more than ever there is.
Okay.
Is that enough yet? Probably not. I think that we're facing just a general mental health
Mm,
crisis
I'd
now,
agree.
quite beyond just artists.
Sure.
But I think artists are also dogged by various other factors that could make bad situations already worse.
Right.
Imposter syndrome is something that I've struggled with myself in my creative background. I've worked as a designer and run creative agencies. Am I good enough? Is my
Okay.
work any good? All these self doubts and anxieties that creep in can just do further to, if you're already beating yourself up about something, can make a bad situation worse. And there's other things about the scene as well. Certain aspects of the dance music scene for certain people are inexorably linked to overindulgence in substance abuse, for example.
Sure.
Something that could turn out as just a fun something to do on nights out can have a longer term impact on your well-being,
Right.
either through chronic drug addiction or just through kind of health problems. I think if you add all these things together, from what I've seen in my experience of being part of this scene for 20 years, is that that you probably stand a higher chance of having some struggles at some time.
Right.
And there's always been the stigma of talking about it, and I feel
Yeah.
like that's disappearing. But as mentioned about Eric earlier, he never mentioned a word of it
Right.
to us. It was completely unknown and a complete shock. And then look at people like in huge popular dance music culture. Was it Avicii?
Avicii. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that it wasn't really well known, as far as I knew, that there was anything wrong there. Um, I don't know. I mean, there's people that are still out there struggling. I think that there are services, but I think that people probably aren't going and connecting with them.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
they feel like, oh, is it? Am I ill enough to kind of to warrant
Right.
this? Mm,
Yeah, sure. Interesting. And bringing this back round again to community, and I just wanted to kind of thank you for sharing your thoughts on that, by the way. It was really, really interesting. And bringing this back round to this idea of community, the My House Your House radio session came to an end in January, and I was tuned in and watching the final show, and it was truly moving. And I know and I know it was a this was a collective sense of emotional outpouring as you hearing how you honoured Eric's legacy by giving
mm,
him the last word on the station through like a pre-recorded message from 2007. I mean, it was an amazing moment, incredibly sobering, somber moment, but also there was this collective sense of honor and grief, but support as well. And I think that this idea of community with the dance music is so prevalent and so important. And how important has that been for you over the years in terms of dealing with grief, dealing with loss, but also building and growing things?
I think it's everything, isn't it, to all
Mm,
humans? I mean,
mm,
community. We're community. We're tribal creatures. We're not solitary. We seek solitude, certainly, on a balance. I do. I like
mm,
walking in the fields and in the hills
sure,
on my own for days. But it's our tribe. And look at the Paradise Garage.
sure,
Brought together an unlikely mix of people to come and celebrate not only through the music that they love, but really celebrate themselves. And I think that's a really important thing, and if you're battling mental health, to kind of feel like there is space that you can be yourself,
sure.
express yourself and celebrate yourself is a very special thing. And
Mm,
dance music and lots of other types of music give that to people
right.
in a way that is joyous and exuberant, and in a way that maybe other types of community can't. Sure, there's people that are in train spotting communities that have great friendships, but in terms of raw expression and energy, there's something special about music, isn't there?
Very
Look at
much
this
so.
collectives of DIY, the people that used to hang out at the bomb. And then when I was, post the bomb, growing up in Nottingham, there's been an amazing bunch, a tight knit bunch of brilliant people around nights like Soul Bugging.
Right.
Beanie was part of the station for 19 years. Basement Boogaloo deserve a shout. Ed Cotton had a show on My House, Your House. And then places like Moog Bar, which was this kind
Mm,
of like out the way, mad laws of the land ceased to apply at the doorstep, but it was self-policing and the most fantastic, safe place to be, and to go and do all those things that I said, to go and celebrate and share joy.
right.
And joy is something that exists so deeply within us that can't be taken away from us. But sometimes you just need to be given the space to go and experience it for yourself,
Mm,
and to share it with others. And that's what all of these places, all of these communities do. You need the people, you need the space, and they've come together to give it us. Um, so yeah, we're very fortunate to have them.
absolutely, man. Well said, man. So good. And with obviously with My House Your House now finished, which is worth saying as well, that so much of your time and effort went in behind the scenes to that, to keep that running over the years. We as a community owe you a huge debt of gratitude for all the work that you put into that. So much of it was thankless and went unseen, and so and but I'm also aware that it was a potentially hugely time consuming for you. So with it now concluded, and you got this extra time, do you have any plans for new musical projects? Anything else happening this year for you musically?
Well, first of all, I mean, I've got to say that the biggest debt of gratitude is owed to everybody that was part of My House, Your House. With just me, it would be nothing. It was only because of all of the other people and all the posting that they did and all of the shows that they broadcast and all of the friends that they told about it to come and listen to it, that then started listening to other shows. I was a functional cog in the middle of it, but I don't for a minute labor under the misapprehension that it was all my work. It certainly wasn't. Um, but yeah, what am I post My House, Your House? Well, first thing I did was I didn't switch my decks on for a month. I went on holiday.
Okay.
And I didn't open didn't open a record or anything. I carried on buying records,
Okay,
interestingly enough.
fine. That's important.
But I had a month off and just let the dust settle and then see what to do next. I DJ with Rob Soulfood, and
Yeah,
together we're Loose Joints. We still have a Sunday, the fourth Sunday of every month, at the Angel in Nottingham, where we
yeah,
play a huge broad range of music. It's free in, and it's just a hangout. And then, there's the Boho Festival in Nottingham, which is a small boutique festival run by the Perkins brothers and their pop-up parties. I'm going to be involved in a couple of events of theirs. But in terms of doing a new project, I don't know. There's the Chase the Groove. So Out the Ashes of My House, Your House. Of course, it came as a shock to the community. Like, oh no, what next? Well, we've got a load of our ex DJs have clubbed together to sort of organise a Twitch raid train. So you
amazing.
tune into one DJ, and at the end, you're automatically dumped into the next DJ's channel, and you just carry on listening.
Brilliant.
And that's so great. Like the legacy of My House, Your House, that people wanted to continue that badly, that they've just come and organised that.
Amazing.
So that's great. Shout out to that. Check it out. But I've got an idea for something I might do,
Okay.
but I needed space in my life post. The reason I pulled the plug was because, well, there's a lot of reasons, the way the internet's changed and all sorts, but I wanted space in my life to explore what is next. And as long as My House, Your House existed, I wouldn't walk through any other doors of opportunity or explore new projects. I have an idea for something that I wouldn't even have time to engage with until at least autumn. which might be a community around streaming music,
Okay.
but it would be run more like a regular event, like, around a weekend,
Okay.
and do something like once a month rather than like a continually running schedule. And it would have a very focused kind of musical output and more of a mission, other than we exist to just broadcast underground music and soul, funk, disco, broken beat, hip hop, jazz, whatever. I would want some other mission, some other purpose statement that gives something else back, as yet undefined. So
Interesting.
I'll think about that while I'm hiking across the hills in the wild and solitary mode.
I look forward to seeing how that shapes up, mate. Thank you. Okay, great stuff. And just to finish, set question. Now, I'm really interested to hear the answer to this question from you because, from just because of your broad taste and your musical education. The set question on Soundcheck Stories is: can you name a track or a piece of music that changed your life? I'm fascinated by the answer to this. So, any thoughts?
Yeah, this is the one that's, since you sent me the question, I've just been racking my brain, and I kept going, so many options, of
Of course.
course, but I kept coming back to exactly the same thing. Um, and I'm going to break the rule. Can I pick a whole album?
Yes, mate. You can do whatever you want.
It's the Orb,
Oh,
and their album UFO Orb, which
interesting.
has
Okay,
it's got Towers of Dub on it, with the prank call about Harley Selassie.
sure.
It's got Close Encounters on it, and it's got OOBEs, the opening track. And I remember we were 8 years old, and we drove to the south of France on holiday, and my dad had just bought the Orb album, and he put it on a tape. And all the way from Nottingham to the south of France and back, we listened to this tape on loop in the car. And I was sat in the back seat of the car, and it blew my mind. I had never heard music like that. And my mind was, when I heard it, was creating soundscapes and then filling them with objects that were dictated by the music that I was hearing.
Interesting.
And I only realised years later that that's quite unusual.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
a form of synesthesia. I've
Right.
done quite a lot of reading about it since, and so I realised that I could see this music in a way that I hadn't before, and that is still an album that I put on probably at least once a month, and it's very close to my heart. So yeah, that really changed me. That was the moment, aged 8, in the back seat of my dad's car, that I realised my relationship with music was abnormal.
Was- but so wider than just an auditory experience, something much more, something, yeah, how interesting. Wow, okay.
Unless,
Uh,
I mean, unless of course I'd had something like slipped into my Capri Sun and I was just tripping. But
yes.
I don't think that's the case. But it was always funny. We go to school trips, and everybody took their personal stereos, and like,
Sure.
your friends would be listening to Bros and New Kids on the Block,
You
and they'd be like, "What are you listening to?" And they put their headphone in and just be like, "What the bloody hell is that?"
Mate,
So yeah, shout out the Orb and the Orb UFO Orb album. It's
great
special.
choice, man. Oh, that did not disappoint. Thanks very much for sharing that, man. Amazing. Thank you. Listen, so good to chat to you, Alex. Thank you for making time for this. I'm aware that the My House Your House site is still active, and it has and I believe that you're adding a list of DJs and contacts onto that page. Is that correct?
Yes, there's. I'm well behind on that, so this is an excellent kick in the backside to get that sorted. Thank you. You'll be able to find all the ex My House Your House DJs on there, all of their social links, their links to their individual Twitch channels, so that you can go and enjoy them, and possibly as part of that Chase the Groove raid train that they're organising. So
Perfect.
yeah, you can still visit myhouseyourhouse.net. Hopefully, by the time this podcast is published, and find that information.
Loose Joints as well is on SoundCloud. Is that right? And
I'm on SoundCloud, so soundcloud.com/Alex Traska. Still going to be doing my spaceship shows, which is the
right.
deep house focused stuff, and then we've got loose joints bits that we do as well.
Perfect.
And you can follow soundcloud.com/Rob Soul Food, and then find us on Instagram.com/loose joints DJs, all one word. See what we're up to at any time. Yeah.
Amazing. Mate, thank you again so much for making time today. Really great to get your thoughts.
Really.
Thank you for sharing so candidly about some really personal stuff. Really appreciate that, Alex. God bless you, mate. Take
Anytime.
care. I'll speak to you soon. Thanks, man.
All the best. Thanks for listening.